We have a breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Hi, I'm Christy Johnson. 9/11 was the Pearl Harbor of my day. These events became a major turning point in my life. Like most Americans, I was stunned. How could a superpower be attacked like this with no resistance? The government told us we were being attacked because of our freedoms. Something just didn't seem right. There had to be more to it than this. So I decided to ask others what they thought.
My definition of a superpower is a power that has no rivals, that can wield its influence at will, that can impose its own policy, its own hegemony at will, can go where it wants to go, and not worry about the consequences. We are that superpower.
The United States emerged from the cinders of World War II with its industrial base still intact, and the only country with the atomic bomb. It was without question the most powerful nation on earth. What was done with this unprecedented power, the effects it had on our republic and the rest of the world, is the story of superpower. President Truman said, "The only thing new in the world is the history you don't know." Well, I wanted to know more. Why are we the only remaining superpower? Did U.S. foreign policy and military actions factor into this attack on 9/11? Immediately after World War II, the United States began influencing and intervening in foreign governments to an extent and in a manner unparalleled in history. The National Security Act of 1947 fundamentally changed and reorganized the United States military establishments, created the National Security Council, and has since been used as the pretext for the extra-constitutional powers in the name of national security. Passed in a time of fear during the Cold War, the National Security Act also created the CIA as an intelligence-gathering agency. But almost immediately, the CIA expanded into a clandestine operations agency.
The CIA's template for regime change was when Arbenz was overthrown in Guatemala in the early 50s.
The United Fruit Company was in danger of losing a substantial amount of its lands in Guatemala. This was an overthrow of a democratically elected government, and it was because of the economic interest involved, not because of democracy.
We leverage the politics, the decisions, and the economies of many, many countries.
The flip side of that, the failures have far outweighed the successes. CIA overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, Operation Ajax, the infamous case where a freely elected, democratically elected government dared to nationalize the oil. What it really came down to was ideology and economic supremacy and imperialism and U.S. hegemony.
Interventions called for a buildup of U.S. political, economic, and military strength by seeking control over world resources and access to raw materials, markets, and labor power in third world countries. Interventions in foreign governments became common practice. Claimed to be for reasons of national security, these interventions were often solely for the benefit of U.S.-backed multinational corporations.
The U.S. supports democracy if and only if it accords with strategic and economic objectives.
So many Americans are not aware of. We have a very tawdry foreign policy history.
What we were doing was overthrowing a freely democratically elected government because they dared to go against our economic interest.
Eisenhower's 1961 farewell address warned us to safeguard our liberties.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic process.
Many people don't realize that the U.S. was involved in Vietnam prior to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution.
In 1962, when John F. Kennedy launched the invasion of South Vietnam, an event which has disappeared from history. This was after 7 years of supporting a brutal, vicious dictatorship in South Vietnam. Kennedy was at a point of making a decision in 1961, Kennedy, McNamara, and others, and they essentially decided to basically invade. The U.S. Air Force began bombing with South Vietnamese markings, so wouldn't look like the U.S. Air Force, but everybody knew. Authorized napalm, initiated programs of chemical warfare, crop destruction, destroying foliage, and also initiated programs of what, if anybody else did it, we would call ethnic cleansing, driving ultimately millions of people out of the countryside to, again, what if anybody else did it, we would call concentration camps, call them strategic hamlets, or into the urban slums and so on, just in order to undermine the basis for the indigenous resistance. If anybody else did this, we would call it aggression. It happened in the United States without a flicker.
Our policy of regime change has made other countries concerned about the goals of United States policy.
But the U.S. government has been overthrowing governments all over the world for quite a few years, especially in Latin America.
A case that we do know very well about, which is Chile in the early 70s. And Salvador Allende, again, freely elected, democratic elected. Chile had the region's strongest, oldest democracy going back to the 70s. Allende nationalizes the copper interests, and the Americans immediately respond with hostility, embargoes. On September 11th, as a matter of fact, 1973 is when Allende was overthrown, actually killed. Here we have a democratic government being overthrown by a CIA coup.
I could see what we were espousing to do in El Salvador, Nicaragua, other places in the region. And then I could see what was taking place, because I was one of those making it take place. Here is the public political pronouncement. Here is what we do. And they don't reconcile. You can't line them up. It's, well, if we say this, but we're doing this. We say we're bringing democracy, but what we're doing is we're enforcing the rule of the oligarchy, the 6 families or the 11 families in El Salvador, and we're slaughtering peasants, and all the peasants want was treat us fairly. That's all we're asking for. Just stop killing us, stop raping us, stop using us as cattle.
Such coups normally don't take place in Latin America except with the okay of Washington.
President Reagan, July 27, 1983.
Yes, we want to underscore once and for all that the United States, along with our friends, seriously opposes the use of force by one neighbor against another in Central America. The United States stands firmly on the side of peace.
Many Cubans were hired to extend the runway at the Grenada airport. U.S. troops invaded to stop this.
October 25, 1983. The U.S. Rapid Deployment Forces hit Grenada. 5,000 Rangers and Marines. By violating all international norms and bringing upon itself the hatred and condemnation of the entire world, the United States demonstrated the level of its complete disregard for the rest of the world.
Nicaragua, Grenada, Panama, the invasion of Panama in violation of international law.
The basic lesson is that the U.S. government will not allow an alternative society or government to exist in Latin America. I'm sure the U.S. government has not relaxed its determination to overthrow Chavez in one way or another.
Looking back, people have often said, well, gee, why did you support this dictator? Why did you support that dictator? Well, because there were other interests that we thought were more important.
In the 1980s, we were supporting Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, just to take 3. You could expand that exponentially.
We like puppet governments. What big country wouldn't like a bunch of little friends around the world that do whatever they tell them to do, right?
The United States has not been in a declared war since World War II. Although not classified as war, military conflicts are given euphemisms such as military action, armed response peacekeeping, police